Hello, you're listening to UNS Talks, a podcast by the international architectural and design firm UNStudio, hosted by me, Cristóbal Burgos. In today's episode, we are going to have an in-depth discussion about the UNStudio latest tool development that is transforming the way our architects and designers approach their projects, the Carbon Builder. This tool allows our teams to analyze and compare numerous design options, guiding them towards choices that significantly minimize the carbon footprints of their projects. As the urgency of the climate crisis intensifies, the need for sustainable practices within the built environment has never been more crucial. The Carbon Builder was developed to offer a faster, more precise design solutions that architects and designers can utilize in their projects. I'm sitting down with UNStudio partner and senior director Arjan Dingsté to uncover the potential of this powerful tool and its ability to inspire the creativity and promote sustainable practices in the built environment. Welcome, Arjan.
Hello, Cristóbal. Very nice to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, I think I'm quite excited about it. So I would just like to jump directly with the big questions. It's about what drives our commitment to sustainability and health as UNStudio.
Yes, I think health and well-being and of course sustainability connected to that are profound values in our built environment. And at UNStudio, I've been realizing more and more that over the last decade, our profession is changing. I would say from design to really design the buildings and environments for the people that use them.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say like UNStudio is fairly well known by our distinct design approach and our bold projects themselves. So how do you think that we are going to preserve that while we are doing this new approach of like doing healthier things and focusing on the built environment itself?
Well, it's a good question. So I would say I'm really coming from a background in computer-aided architectural design. And that's why I joined UNStudio in the past. Whereas in the beginning, it was a lot about how people move through the space using like dynamic software like Maya when it just came out. We've always been kind of looking and researching at this company. So we're a research-based company. And with our profession changing and of course with the Paris Agreement as a kind of guiding goal on the horizon, we've used that research ethics, I would say, how we design, and we are kind of reshaping the goals, but we're still like a research-based company at our core, which drives us. And now the profession is moving in a different direction, and we adapted heavily to that.
Yeah. And what do you think what is the things that we are actually adapting in our day-to-day practices? What are the changes that we are doing in-house to achieve that?
Yes, I think that shift in practice is quite apparent. We've always been trying to of course, follow the certification systems that we have been applying to our buildings, like the BREEAM system, LEED systems, all driven by kind of energy reduction. So I think the big focus has been, I would say, last decade on reducing energy in buildings. That led to us ultimately going for net zero positive buildings. We've delivered our first energy delivering projects over the past years. But I think what these systems have been neglecting, first of all, is the human health. So they're not so much health focused, like a BREEAM system is 60-70% about reduction of energy. And then, of course, there are many other factors that the BREEAM system looks at, but not with a profound focus on health and well-being. And in 2015, the well-being standard came along. At that time, UNStudio was already very focused on shifting the paradigm to healthy buildings. For example, the Booking.com headquarters was designed against these principles. And if we now measure that against the well-building standard, then it's a very high-performing building. But now with the Paris Agreement and global warming potential, there's a much more stronger focus on a whole life carbon approach. So not just the operational part, and it's shifting towards the embodied carbon. And that asks from us that we design different, that we design much more context aware. And this is what we're basically facilitating within our company with the Carbon Builder.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
one of the topics of today's discussion.
Yeah, because for me, it's always like the issue that the human factor of the designers, like how we make sure that they actually know what they're doing, that they understand all the different complexities of understanding the design of a healthy building. So I think a couple of the strategies that we are doing in order to go there are quite interesting. Is there anything that you are more prone to that you think are more crucial, like the carbon builder associate something with that?
Well, it's a multifaceted approach, and our life as architects doesn't become easier. I think that's if I look personally, I think the personal development and what I need to learn as an architect to be able to do my job, and of course, if it applies to me, it applies to all the architects in this company, is a very profound, deep knowledge how buildings function. And I think in the past, architects looked at sustainability at some things for which you get an advisor and they will help you making the building better. The problem comes forward that advisor only joins when typically the design is already there. And what we feel with a lot of these elements, you need a kind of force feedback system. So if you're designing and that's very much, of course, on design, on function of the building. And of course, we're looking to daylight, etc. But intrinsic performance and sustainability, you typically only know when the advisors start calculating your building.
Yeah, exactly.
Which can be weeks, sometimes months after the design has been brought to life, let's say. A lot of times we saw we're in repairing mode afterwards. Then the consultants came in and said, well, computer says no, it doesn't work or doesn't work optimal. And then you're repairing a suboptimal design and you cannot go back a lot of times. So this made us think that we have to bring in this thinking very, very early in the design processes. And that's what we have been starting to do at UNStudio.
Yeah, exactly. I would say I'm doing a lot of the tool initiatives, let's say. So for us, that mission is quite clear, and we really focus on how we develop the products themselves as a really the extension of the hand for the architects and designers. So basically, they don't have to worry about doing all of these complex things, but they can just do it because it's easy for them and they already understand how to use them. So
yes, and I think maybe that's something you should kind of elaborate a little bit on, because one thing is I would say the way people learn at our current practice is different from how we learned in the past, how we learned in university. And it's also important that people understand what they're doing. Can you tell a little bit more about that, how you bring that into the tools?
Yeah, well, basically we have a really user-centric approach that we want people to be bold. We want people to actually understand what they're doing. And for me, the most important thing is that they're able to talk at the same level of knowledge with any consultant. So for example, if the sustainability consultant tells you this is not the way to go, they have the tools to say hey, this is the way that we think we can go, and that you can have a one-to-one conversation on the same level. So for that, we have a three-prong approach that is basically we give them really easy to use tools that are just as much as one click as possible. So they don't have to worry about connecting the grasshopper from here to there and understanding how to do the database. We have also, and this is my favorite project, a documentation platform that basically documents how every tool is supposed to be used and also how to think about using the tool. So for example, for this carbon builder, I would say 60% of the documentation for it is how you should design a healthier building. What strategies can you apply to reduce the carbon footprint of the building? Because by the end of the day, there's so many possibilities that we are just trying to understand the way of how UNStudio does this. And for me, this is the most crucial part, because by the end of the day, I don't think it's very useful to have a really nice tool that gives you really nice output if you don't have people using it, or if it's too complex for people to use it. Because the reality is that we don't have infinite amount of time to go one by one and teaching them things. So basically, we just try to go really teaching them as globally as possible with these kind of things and the workshops that we're doing. And I would say the third initiative that we have that it's quite nice is that we have a lot of people as ambassadors of these tools running across the studios, and they're providing us really nice feedback about what things are working, what things have not been working, and what things they feel like they need. Because we have the understanding that basically if we make the architects and designers feel listen, they are really more prone to adopt the tools and integrate them into their work to to their day-to-day operation, because we know, for example, that these things involve some changes in the way that they work. We are always trying to think about a way of doing it with the minimal disruption possible, but by the end of the day, they need to change things. So if we gave them things to make that change easier, the adoption it's a lot more easy, let's say.
Well, it's very clear. Huh? So that's something we set as a target, of course, to not overcomplicate things, to almost simplify the challenges, so that our architects are saving time in the operation of the tools, getting the goals very clear of what these tools can achieve, and learning alongside. I think that's very important value that you just brought forward. And I think that's driving us, because I think the new generations of architects also joining our company are very, I would say, conscious about what our profession does to the earth, and that we have to make very, I would say, careful choices. But it's also a very complex topic, and by, I would say, simplifying, focusing on the main target objectives, making people understand what this is about and how they can tackle that is a very strong basis, I would say, to our design approach, and developing from there, I think, is very powerful, and aiding them in getting that time available and getting that force feedback on their design process. Yeah,
exactly. So I think we should go into the Carbon Builder itself, because in my opinion, it's one of the most representative projects that we have developed, with the spirit of innovating into all the projects that we're doing. Could you tell us a bit how, the genesis of how the Carbon Builder came to be?
Yes. Well, the Carbon Builder ties in this kind of problem that we had defined, and in that shift, what I mentioned before, from, I would say, the energy approach, operational energy, so the energy we use in our buildings for heating, cooling, ventilation, especially the fan energy is very important. This has been catered by these systems like BREEAM, focusing on that, reducing on that, also coming from earlier energy crises. However, with the global warming potential and the research that has been done to support that, we started noticing, and not just us as UNStudio, but the world started noticing that actually the energy that goes into our building materials, going into the concrete, into the steel, into the construction process, is like the first 40 years of a building's lifespan, much more important than operational energy. And in that drive for net zero buildings, it will be almost the only one that we need to focus on. So coming from that shift, that we not just need to look at operational carbon, but actually at the embodied carbon, so this energy that sits in the materials, we started thinking how we could work in our design process to attack that problem. Because that's just the most important driver on global warming potential. We need to have control over it as architects. We need to understand it. We need to know how we can change our buildings to facilitate that. So what we started looking into, and of course we have a lot of software to our availability in our design processes. Software we can connect to our BIM models like one-click LCA, which are really good, I would say, software packages, but they're very detailed. They have very extensive databases. So you need quite a mature BIM model to connect these databases to it. Basically means we need to connect a material property to every single material in the project. However, at that time, the design is already there. So you can only kind of sub-optimize the design. And we found that it is too detailed, too complex to apply that to very early design stages. So the Carbon Builder solves that problem. The Carbon Builder is a software tool that we can connect to our earlier sketches, I would say, or earlier conceptions of buildings, where we can immediately illustrate a kind of heat map where carbon would be sitting in a building. It drives certain focus areas, and with these focus areas we can apply different best practices. And that allows us very early in the design process to basically see how is our building performing against the Paris Agreement, to prevent the earth from warming up, to set certain targets. Also the Dutch Green Building Council has been very profound in setting a kind of roadmap. What do we need to achieve in the structures, in the facades of our buildings to be compliant with Paris Agreement goals in 2030, 2040, 2050. as it gives directly feedback to our designers, and they can also choose from different building materials on certain components, immediately see how their design is performing and if it's aligning itself with the goals set by the Paris Agreement. And that inspires our architects to change their designs, to improve designs very early in the moment. It almost creates a challenge to create a building that follows the Paris Agreement and reduces that carbon from the onset of making the first conception of a design.
Yeah, I remember when you came to me and to ask me about like, hey, do you think we could build this? The first thing that we did was like, okay, let's see if we can make it work with a software that already exists, because sometimes it doesn't make sense to build them. So we just test them out, and I remember that they were either too complex to use or they didn't allow us to do the geometries that we wanted to do. And for us, for me at least, I would say that the most crucial thing was that most of them didn't allow us to use like experimental materials, that we couldn't like really go the extra mile of like doing extra research for the project and say like, hey, we're going to use this latest concrete with this combination of this super low carbon steel. So that limitation was quite fundamental for us. So I think that was like one of the main reasons that we decided to go with this development process. And we started with something quite small. It was just calculating the areas of things and the volumes and just multiplying by the carbon value. But we have been progressing on that tool quite a lot, especially with a lot of the feedback that we have gotten from our users. This is still like a really easy to use tool with its own limitations, but we just want to make sure that what we are doing is something correct and give us the proper insights, because as you say a bit earlier, we really wanted to avoid having a conversation in the DD phase of the project that was a lot more expensive to solve, or sometimes you couldn't even solve, because we want to make like the correct decisions really early on the project. And for me, that was like quite interesting to understand. And I would like to know like how you see this going into our day-to-day workflow, and because this has to be a change in terms of like how the architects think and design the process.
Yeah, it has to become, I would say, daily thinking practice.
Yeah.
I think it's the biggest problem to solve in the construction industry. And it needs thinking from the start. So it's exactly like you explained it. We kind of simplified the problem to make our architects understand what are the main drivers. But like you also said, it should not be limited to I would say validated databases. Construction, in essence, is very slow. When we are designing a building, it takes 2 years, sometimes 3 years, sometimes even longer to construct these buildings. So in this tool, we are applying, I would say, materials that are available. We're not looking into research laboratory stuff that is coming out like in 10 years. We're looking at materials that we think are available either right now, or they have been just applied in 1 or 2 buildings. We think there's an evolution happening there. I think we need our architects to be able to understand, let's say, the recipe of a building. And that recipe can change. So we can cook meals from different ingredients. We can make different meals. So that composition on the materials that we're applying and understanding what is the carbon footprint of these materials, but also understanding, I would say, the progress in the profession is important. And it's important because we see quite a shift, at least we anticipate quite a shift, where I would say in the past 4 to 5 years, there were a lot of architects, for example, starting to design buildings in wood, which is in essence a very good step. We're looking into new construction methodologies, or actually old ones that like we are reinventing again, with the intention to make more sustainable buildings. However, if we are a research-based practice, we started comparing the performance of these buildings. Design in wood, comparing them to steel, to concrete, to mixes of these materials. And then we found that for a lot of buildings, looking at their kind of functional needs, wood structures wouldn't be the best answer. It was just that, let's say, concrete steel hybrids could be more efficient, but still they had a bad footprint connected to that. And this is where we see changes now in the market. We see big advances in producers of materials that don't want to run out of business to make their products more sustainable. And that allows us to test a lot of materials, sometimes just used in 1-2 buildings before, but available in the market. And it allows us to design buildings, let's say, maybe almost you could say with more traditional materials, but with lower carbon footprints. And by being able to mix the recipes of this in our carbon builder tool, we can develop market viable buildings that still hit the Paris Agreement targets.
Yeah, because I would say like in general, our clients, the people that want our designs, even for ourselves, this is like one of the key things now. It's like what everyone wants to be part of, and because they understand the urgency for the whole world of like having more sustainable and healthier buildings in general.
Correct, and I think everybody wants to do it. There's nobody that's going to tell you, I don't want to do a sustainable building. Well, some clients maybe do that, but that's more because they either think they're not so interested personally, or they think it's too complicated for them. And if it's too complicated for them, it might even be too complicated for architects in-house. So that's why we are developing these tools, that we make things easy. We make things easy to understand. We make the strategies easy to understand, and we make people understand that we don't need to make every building out of wood to make it sustainable, that there's actually very good possibilities that we can make buildings with other materials that are still very sustainable. Achieving same goal level, but maybe even outperforming on functionality and future flexibility.
Exactly, because I see that in the projects that we have been testing out the Carbon Builder, that this real-time feedback has really had a big impact on the outcome of the projects themselves and also in the conversations that we are having. I would like to move to like what's the first project that we applied the Carbon Builder, that we actually built it for, that is Kiklos, this project in Luxembourg. I would like if you could tell me about like how this tool has enabled us to have like a different conversation on what things are we seeing different in this project that you would have done before.
Yes, well, I think that project gave us a very good opportunity to start thinking about this challenge. So after having delivered first energy delivering building, our university building for the technical university in Delft, Echo building, where we said, okay, we got the client coming in saying we want a zero energy building because it fits to our carbon roadmap for our university. And we told them, yes, we're going to deliver that, but we want to design that building from human health perspective, because this is what we think we should be doing. We are designing buildings for people. And if people cannot be healthy in the buildings, then the buildings don't have a good function, in our opinion. So we put the priority first and still delivering on the promise of net zero energy. And we're having a second project on the construction, basically based on the same values. In the Dutch, they have this kind of funny regulation called BANG, which means almost energy neutral buildings, which we said this is just ridiculous. We're going to make an energy neutral building and go beyond that. Yeah. But it's not a race for becoming the most energy neutral, because energy neutral is energy neutral. Exactly. And you can go beyond that. That means you are making an energy delivering building, and you need to have a little bit of surplus to cover that. So with that knowledge in mind and looking at the challenge that we got in Luxembourg, we said, okay, if we know how to do that, and it's a little bit of an arrogant statement, of course, because every building is a little bit different. What is our next challenge? Because we like to give ourselves challenges in the competitions that we do. And we said from that perspective of global warming potential and looking towards the embodied carbon, we said that's what we want to learn. That's what we want to develop in this project. Because the characteristics of the building were quite equal to what we have done before on the zero energy on the operational side. But this project gave us an interesting challenge because it was positioned on a former ArcelorMittal steel factory site, which was still the ground owner of the project. So it didn't make a lot of sense to design it in wood because the promoter of the project would not have been very happy with the result. No, jokes aside, that project allowed us to start thinking about embodied carbon and the carbon that sits in materials. And to increase that challenge, we said, well, let's not design it in wood. Let's see if we can design a building that is fitting to the Paris Agreement goals, designed in maybe concrete, maybe steel, combinations of the materials to achieve that goal aligning with the Paris Agreement. So we started looking around. We started looking around in Luxembourg to find what is their most sustainable building at that moment that we did the competition. And we found an office building where we started looking, okay, how did they solve their energy challenge? Because they said, yeah, we're carbon neutral. How did they do that? And we started looking into the structure and said, they're using traditional materials. This is a bit odd.
Yeah.
We started calculating and we found that the actual building had, like, I would say, almost equal to normal buildings' carbon footprint. I think it was around 580 kilogram of CO2 per square meter floor area. And they offset at that. They bought a forest to make the building sustainable. As we cannot buy a forest with every building we do, we set that target for this project to achieve that. And we started developing the Carbon Builder tool to make us work with it, to give us insights in that process, to start looking, okay, what's now the best concrete we can find off the shelf in the market? What's the best concrete we expect would be available when we start constructing this building? Same thing for steel, same thing for glass facades, glazing producers. And by mapping that and looking at the different possibilities in this project, we quite quickly found a way to basically predict a roadmap for the building. That doesn't mean this is the recipe and this is how the building is going to perform. It means like, okay, in best practice scenario, the building can achieve this carbon footprint. In I would say, common practice scenario, we can still achieve this level. And if we don't do anything, we'll end up in the worst case. And that allows us, together with the client that selected us in the end in this project, because they were very much engaged by our strategy, to work together to develop a carbon strategy for the building and to also make not only conscious decisions very early in the design process, like we did in the competition, but also validate any kind of decision in the design process in making the building ready for construction.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that also brings up the topic about one of the best things of the construction world, that is collaboration. But at the same time, it's one of the hardest because it requires a lot of like coordination and making all the stakeholders align themselves. Would you say that the Carbon Builder has had an impact on how we are able to talk with the other stakeholders?
Yes, but it's not easy, like you said. It's I would say every specialist wants to do their specialism the best in a building. But a lot of times people do this from their experience, how they've always been working and what they have been proving to themselves, let's say what's working well in a building. And people don't want to make mistakes. Once it's built, you want the building to function. However, the problem is so challenging on the level of carbon, because we're shifting to a whole life carbon approach, like looking both operational and embodied together. That needs all disciplines, the MEP specialist, the sustainability engineer, energy engineer, structural engineer, all work together with the architect, together with the client that's making decisions ultimately to drive a certain goal and to also make choices in that. Because we can only, I would say, well, the compromise sounds really bad, but it has to be a balance between different actors in a project. And sometimes you have to make a little bit more unsustainable choices in one discipline to achieve a greater effect in another. And that's why we believe very strongly in an integral design process where all specialisms work together, but it needs a mindset. And that's, I would say, the biggest challenge in projects. How can we make everybody think the same, driving to the same problem solving that we all need to do? And it's the same problem we see in-house. How do we get our people to understand what are our goals? What are we trying to achieve? So it's a little bit of a challenge, but I think we'll get there.
Yeah, 100% we will get there. So what do you see as like UNStudio, our goals are to be with these healthy and sustainable things?
Well, I would say the goals are I would say moving goals, moving targets. Right now, we are aligning, I would say, our sustainability goals quite strongly to European taxonomy. Not that the taxonomy gives us very clear KPIs, but it gives us a guideline how to look at the different processes and how to look at the different topics. And we need something to guide us. And we found that the European taxonomy and the level system connected to that explains us very well what we should be focusing on. As architects, not only architects, but also together with our clients and with our engineers. So this European taxonomy gives us very clear guidelines how to attack the process. And we're in the process of constantly reevaluating what are our goals connected to that. So we are thinking about what carbon footprint a UNStudio building should have as a maximum. That doesn't mean we can solve that in every region in the world. Of course, sustainability is a different topic and has a different focus point on the different geographies that we're working at UNStudio. And we can see that also in I would say, the way carbon is validated right now. There's a big shift in how, I would say, governments, countries, cities are validating carbon right now. So the global trading level of carbon, well, it's been moving a bit like between 60 and 80 euros a ton in the past months. But we see, however, like a city of Amsterdam rating carbon at 438 euro a ton. City of Utrecht in the Netherlands going even above 800. Whereas Singapore rates it as like 1.5 euro. So you can see a range of like a factor of 800 in how governments drive the carbon topic. So these Dutch cities that I just mentioned, in every investment decision they make, they validate carbon. So if they buy a new tram, let's say, they will analyze the carbon footprint of that tram. And from the different offers that they're getting from the manufacturers, they will multiply that with the carbon price of this 438 in the case of the city of Amsterdam. And that tips the balance. And we see that happening in real estate already, that some funds, some developers are saying, yes, we validate carbon because if we take it in the financial equation, we make our decisions different. And I was in a talk last week with a developer that demonstrated that, and they made a different decision. They went for a different type of structure for their development because they priced carbon. That was their internal rule. The interesting thing was when they put their building up for sale, they could get a 10% premium in the sales of that building because people buying are putting in their kind of governance structures that they have to go in their assets for sustainable developments and are willing to pay premium for that. It's a very financial incentive, but we think that the whole market is pivoting towards that. And if we create these financial incentives, both internally, what is a UNStudio building, what is the target, what is going out of this door with a kind of minimum and maximum driving target, this is what we're developing right now. And the market is asking for it, and the market should be asking for it as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, I think we're just about to conclude, but I would like to ask you, from all this conversation, what aspect of the carbon builder you think deserves the more attention in terms of how that aligns with our sustainable mission, or where you think that this is going to?
Well, I think my ultimate dream is that every architect working at UNStudio, and not only at UNStudio, but in the whole profession, understands the responsibility that we carry as architects in this topic. And I would say it's also inspiring because when I started working as a young architect, using all these kind of software possibilities and looking at movement and flow and making buildings emerge from this analysis, so scientific, creative approach, it was always the unexpected that surprised me and that allowed us to create great buildings. And I think from this process, the same can emerge. If we let these softwares creatively guide us, they will show us roadmaps to buildings that suddenly get a bit odd shapes, but are performing really well, or using combinations of materials that we would not have predicted before. So I think it's enhancing our creative process. And so it's not killing creativity, actually enhancing creativity. And it will create a whole new series of buildings that are not only beautiful and intriguing, but sustainable at their core as well.
Yeah, exactly. I'm quite excited about the things that we have on the development roadmap. I think we have set it out quite ambitious targets with the team. Now we have people doing this like almost full time, so we are super excited about that one. We're about to launch a new version of the internal tool, so the architects can really make everything a lot easier. And we're working to like really nice to have tools, because we're doing a lot of like analysis of like how the users themselves are using it. We have a really good collection of data points, so we can understand what are their pain points about like, hey, at one point they stop using the tool because it doesn't become really like a tool for them, but it's just more of a burden. So we are really focusing on tackling all of those points, so we can actually have a good adoption, so everyone can use it. So that goes from someone that doesn't feel like they should be doing all the sustainability thing the whole day, but even they can use them and they can understand and they can have a one-to-one conversation with everyone about it. So I'm quite excited about how this is going to be.
Well, we're all excited,
Yeah.
and I think there's no excuses anymore. And
Yeah.
the good thing is it creates interesting architecture.
Yeah, exactly. So if anyone wants to know a bit more about this, is there a way that they can learn about it?
Well, first of all, through this podcast,
Yeah.
and of course we'll be posting our developments on our media channels. And please follow our projects, because we're pushing these technologies through our projects.
Yeah.
Thank you
Great.
so much.
Thanks.